This complete C++ course will take you from being an absolute beginner to using advanced C++ features. Daniel Gakwaya teaches this course. He is an experienced software developer and has created many popular courses.
Hello guys, and welcome to this Modern C++ 20 course. This is a course that is going to take you from the absolute beginning where you know nothing about C++ and you're going to go all the way to a point where you can use some advanced features in the C++ programming language. That includes things like object-oriented programming with inheritance and polymorphism with the C++ programming language. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time convincing you on why you should use C++, but C++ is a very powerful programming language you can use to do all kinds of crazy things. You can use it to do systems programming, you can build games with it, and it is used in a wide range of areas, so you can do a lot with C++. Now, who is this course for? This course is built for complete beginners. If you already have some experience with C++, you will still find some good things you can learn from the course, but I am going to go from the absolute beginning, showing you every little thing, showing you the tools, showing you the compilers and the editor we're going to be using here. So we're going to spend a lot of time making sure you understand the fundamentals. By the time you are done with this course, you will understand the bare fundamentals about C++. We will spend a lot of time exploring the procedural programming side of C++. So you're going to be writing programs that run from top to bottom. And we're going to spend a lot of time in the editor writing code, making sure you really understand what is going on here. Towards the end, we're going to learn about object-oriented programming, and we're going to touch on classes, inheritance, and polymorphism. And these are the tools you're going to be using a lot in your career as a C++ developer. Another great feature of this course is that we spend a lot of time making sure you understand the tools. So if you don't know what a compiler is, if you don't know what an IDE is, we're going to make sure you understand these things, and we're going to spend a lot of time using these things. And by the time you're done with the course, you're going to be very comfortable using the tools. The editor of choice for the course is going to be Visual Studio Code. So that's an editor that is going to allow us to type with the code and give us some things like syntax highlighting. But we're going to be connecting our editor to a background compiler, which is going to make sure our code is transformed to run on our computer. But don't worry about all that craziness right now. We're going to go in detail about these things. For now, I just want you to have a bird's eye view on what you can expect from the course here. Now, I hope you know what to expect from the course, but I also expect you to be ready to take the course. And the requirements are really not that bad. The only requirement is that you have time set aside to really practice what you learn from the course here, and you need to have a strong drive and willingness to learn. Now, if you want to follow along, I am going to share a link to the GitHub repository for the code I use in the course, so you can check that out and really follow along if you want. If you want some support, we have a Discord server dedicated for our students, so you can join and be part of the community. If you have a question, you can ask. But another thing I would encourage you to do is to also help others. So if you see somebody asking a question, try to help them. You're going to learn a lot that way. Okay, now that you know a bit about the course, let's talk about myself here. My name is Daniel Gakwaya. I am a software engineer. I have been writing code since 2011 or something. And I am a professional C++ developer. I do a lot of freelance work. I work for a few companies. I do all kinds of crazy things. I also like to teach others, so I have a few courses on Udemy. If you are interested in Qt, you can check these things out. I also have a trending C++ course that you can check out, but don't feel the need to go and check this C++ course out because a lot is covered in this YouTube course here. So that's really all about me. Okay, now that you have an idea about the course, we're going to head over in the next lecture and learn about the tools we're going to be using throughout the course here. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there. Welcome to this new chapter where we're going to be exploring the C++ development tools you need to start writing your own C++ applications. And you really need two kinds of tools. The first one is going to be an editor or an IDE through which you're going to be writing your C++ code. We are going to be using Visual Studio Code as an editor in this course because it is very easy to install. It is cross-platform. It is going to run well on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And it supports a host of tools that are going to make your job easier as a C++ developer. But that's not to say you can't use your favorite IDE if you can. But Visual Studio Code is going to be our main editor in this course, so I would recommend installing it to be able to follow along with what we do here. Now, after we have an IDE or an editor in place, we will need a compiler, and a compiler is a piece of software that takes the code we write in the editor and compiles that into code that can directly run on the hardware or binary executable format. So this is what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be typing our code in an editor like Visual Studio Code. We're going to be kicking off a process to compile our program, and this is going to turn our program into a format that can run directly on the hardware. So for example, if you are on a Windows machine, you're going to generate a binary executable that can directly run on Windows. If you are on Linux, we will generate a binary that can run on Linux. And the same concepts can really extend on Mac or any other kind of operating system you might be working on with the course here. So we need two tools. We need an IDE or an editor and a compiler. And the tools you install are going to be depending on the operating system you are using to watch the course. If you are on Windows, you're going to install a set of tools that are specific to Windows. If you are on Linux, you're going to install a set of tools for Linux. If you are on a Mac, you're going to install a set of tools specific to the Apple operating system for desktop. Now, on Windows, in terms of IDEs or integrated development environment, it is possible to use a host of IDEs. For example, you can use CodeLight. It is an IDE you can use. You can use Microsoft Visual Studio. But in this course, we're going to be using Visual Studio Code because it is easy to install. It has a set of features that are really good. It is popular. It has a great community around it. I think you're going to have a great time as a beginner to start writing your C++ programs using Visual Studio Code. That's not to say that you can't use another IDE. You can if you want, but I am going to be using Visual Studio Code in this course here. Now, on Linux, we are also going to be using Visual Studio Code as our editor in the course, but there are other IDEs you can use. For example, you can use Qt Creator if you want. You can use CodeLight. You can use a host of other IDEs on Linux. But again, Visual Studio Code is going to be our thing in the course here, and I would recommend installing it on your Linux box if you are watching this course on the Linux machine. So for OS X, we are also going to be using Visual Studio Code as our editor. As I said, it is cross-platforms. It runs where regardless of the operating system you might be using to watch the course. But if you want, you can use the Apple IDE, which is Xcode or even CodeLight. All these are going to work if you want. But again, I would recommend going with Visual Studio Code at least to start out so that we have a common ground and you don't get confused very easily, especially if you are a beginner. Now, after we have an IDE rolling, we will need a compiler. And as we say, the compiler is a tool that is going to transform your C++ code into a format that can run directly on the hardware. So the compiler you use again is going to depend on the operating system where you are watching the course. I am going to show you a bunch of compilers you can use, but GCC is going to be our common base. So on Windows, I will be using what we call MinGW. Don't worry if you don't know what it is. I am going to show you in a minute when we install it. But this is a project that brings the GCC compiler on Windows so that we can use it easily. And I am going to show you how to install it. But I am also going to show you how to install the compiler from Microsoft and the Clang LLVM compiler. These are all available to you on Windows, and it is really easy to install them these days. And I will be using them all. If you are on Windows, I would recommend installing them all so that you really have a chance to try your C++ code on different compilers, and that's a really good thing to do. If you test your C++ code against multiple compilers, you will be increasing your chances for your code to really be portable and work on multiple compilers and operating systems, and that cannot be a bad thing. So I would recommend installing all these compilers if you are on Windows. I am also going to show you how to install two compilers on Linux. I am going to show you GCC. We're going to install the shiny new feature in GCC. We're going to install Clang LLVM on Linux, and we will be able to use all these compilers. Again, if you are on Linux, I would recommend installing all these compilers so that you have a chance to try your code against multiple compilers, and that's going to make your code much portable and easier to use on multiple compilers and platforms. On the Mac, I am going to show you how to install GCC, and I am going to show you how to install Clang LLVM. But if you want, you can also install Xcode and the compiler that comes with it for C++ development. All of these are options to you, but again, in this course, we are mostly going to be using the GCC compiler, so I would recommend getting a hold of this if you don't want to install other compilers. If you only have to install one compiler, please install GCC. That's going to be our main compiler in the course here. Okay, so these are the tools we need. We are going to head over in the next lecture and show you how to install the Visual Studio Code Editor on Windows and really get started with that. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me in the next lecture. In this video, I am going to show you how to install a C++ compiler on your Windows operating system. So we're going to be looking at three kinds of compilers. We're going to look at the MinGW compiler, which gives us access to a GCC-like compiler on Windows. We're going to look at Clang LLVM, which is another compiler. We're going to look at the compiler from Microsoft. Now, before we talk about any compiler, I would like you to come to Google or your favorite search engine and say C++ compiler support. Okay, so we're going to choose this little guy here. And this is really going to give us a bird's eye view on which feature is supported by which C++ compiler. For example, if we are interested in C++20, which is the latest standard that we have in C++, at the time of recording this video, I am recording this in August 2021. But if we go here, we're going to see C++20 core features, and we're going to see that we have a list of what each compiler supports. We have GCC, we have Clang, we have MSVC, we have the Clang version from the Apple company. And if we scroll down, we can really see the features that are supported by each compiler. Again, GCC is going to be our choice in this course. This is going to be our main compiler, but nothing really stops you from using the Clang compiler or the MSVC compiler. And if you happen to see that your compiler of choice doesn't support what you need, for example, you can see that at the current time, lambdas in unevaluated context are not supported in Clang. You can see that it is ready here, but this is a feature you can use both in GCC and the MSVC compiler from Microsoft. So keep an eye out on this page here to know which kind of things you can use in your compiler. If you try something out and you see that it doesn't work, this is a good place to come and figure out if your compiler supports the feature that you are using. In this video, I am going to show you how to install the three most common compilers, and those are GCC, Clang, MSVC. If you want, you can come in your search engine and type GCC to see what this is. It is a good thing to do to learn about your tools here. You can see that it is a compiler that is mostly used on the Linux platform, but we can also use it on Windows. The latest release that we're going to be installing is 11.20, I think. It was released 6 days ago, so it is really fresh, and we're going to be taking advantage of this. Another thing I should say here is that you should install the latest tools you can get your hands upon. This is the version we're going to be mostly using in this course, but if you are watching this in the future, you're going to have a newer version. I would recommend installing the latest version or the newest version you can get your hands upon. So the first we're going to do is install a GCC compiler on Windows. I am going to show you a way we can get both GCC and Clang in one go. And to get access to that, please go in your search engine and type WinLibs. And this is going to bring us to this project here. If you want, you can click upon this. And this is a cool project by a guy who is providing builds for these compilers that we can use on Windows. So if you want, you can just go down here and look at the latest releases. Again, I recommend using the latest you can get your hands upon. In this case, the latest happens to be 11.20, But in the future, this is going to change. You're going to find a version for 12 or 13. So please grab the newest version you can get your hands upon. Now, I want you to install the version that says that it has LLVM and Clang. So if you are on a 32-bit version on Windows, I would recommend getting this 7-zip archive or this zip archive here. If you are on 64, I would recommend getting a hold of this or this little thing here. It doesn't really matter. But make sure you get the latest version you can get your hands upon. And you can see that this conveniently says latest here. So I am going to download the 64-bit version on Windows. I am going to grab the zip archive here. And let's click upon this. This should kick off my download. And this is going to download on my system. I can download this if I want. And you're going to see that it is going to start downloading here. And I am going to wait for this to finish. Again, this is going to give us both the GCC compiler and the Clang compiler. And this is really like shooting two birds with one stone. So this is going to be really good. I already have this downloaded. So I am just going to head over to the location where I have this downloaded. I think I can just go in my drive here. So let's crack this open and go in my downloads folder. And if I go in my compressed folder, I am going to find WinLabs LLVM and MinGW. This is what you really want. But if you don't want the Clang compiler, you can grab the one that doesn't say LLVM here. Because we really want both of these compilers, we are going to grab the one that has both the GCC compiler and the Clang compiler. If we crack this open, let's open this together so that you can see what is happening. We are going to have this little folder here. If we go in, we're going to find a bin folder. If we go in and crack that open, we're going to have a folder that says Clang. You see, we have our Clang compiler. We have our Clang++ compiler for C++. And if we go down, we're going to find our G++ compiler and the GCC compiler. This is what we want. So what we are going to do is extract this somewhere on our system. I put this on my C drive. So if you go here, you're going to find MinGW64. So all you really have to do is go where you downloaded your compiler and say extract. We're going to right click on this and say extract to a location, and you're going to specify where you want this to go. And this is going to be extracted. Or even if you want, you can extract here. This is something I like to do. This is going to show up in the current folder, and you can grab this and paste that in a location where you want this. In my case, I put this in my C drive, as I said here. So this is going to be my compiler. Now, once you have these compilers installed, again, we have the Clang compiler, we have the GCC compiler. If we go down, we're going to find the G++. We even have GDB, which is a debugger we can use to debug C++ applications. But we will talk about this later. Once you have this, I would recommend putting this in your environment variables on Windows. The way you do this, you grab this path. Well, we have our compilers here, and we're going to copy this. This is something I recommend. And on Windows 10, you can go on the Start menu and type env. And this is going to give us a window in which we can edit our environment variables. We're going to click on this little thing. This is going to open up on our system. We're going to wait for this to open up. And we're going to have a window that says System Properties. We're going to click on Environment Variables here. And we can put this in our user environment variables or on our system environment variables. Since I am the only one using this system, I like to put this in my path for my system variables. So I am going to click on Path and click Edit here. And I am going to add a path to my GCC and Clang installation here. You can see that right here. If you don't have this in, you can click on New. You're going to have a window here and you can paste this right in and you can click OK, but I'm not going to do that because I already have this in here. So what I am going to do is just delete this. Let's see if I can delete. I can delete this little guy and I have my path in here. So if you don't have this in, please make sure you have this in your environment variables. So we're going to cancel out of this, but if this is the first time you do this, you should click OK. And one way to test that your environment variables are working, or even if your compilers are working, is to crack up a command line terminal. So we're going to say CMD on the Start menu here. And all you need to do is say G++, just like this, -- version. If you do this, you're going to see information about your C++ compiler, and this is coming from the installation we just did. And for Clang, you can say Clang ++ version, and this is going to tell you the information about your Clang compiler installation. Let's wait for this to come up. I don't know why it's slow, but you can see that we have our Clang compiler. The latest version is 12.01. For the GCC compiler, the latest version is 11.20. And these are the compilers we can use to write C++20 applications. Okay, so by now we have a GCC compiler through the MenjiW project. We have a Clang LLVM compiler on our system. We are also going to see how to get a hold of the compiler from Microsoft. And to get a hold of this, you need to install Microsoft Visual Studio. To install Microsoft Visual Studio, all you have to do is come to your favorite search engine and say Microsoft Visual Studio. We can look at the 2019 version, which is the latest, I think. And we're going to click on the download link here we have as the first link. And we're going to see ways we can download this little guy. Now, Microsoft Visual Studio has a community version you can download for free, but we also have a professional and enterprise versions that we're not going to care about in this course here. We are just going to download the community version, and that's going to be enough for our purposes here. So if you click on free download here, this is going to download and install the Visual Studio compiler. You can click on this little guy and it is going to download an installer. You're going to crack this open on your system and it is going to install the Visual Studio installer. So once you have it installed, you can come to the start menu here and say Visual Studio installer. I think if you say Visual Studio, you're going to have this pop up somewhere on your system. We're going to click on this. And if you crack the installer open, you're going to see a window like this, which is really going to give you a chance to install the tools you want to use with the Microsoft Visual Studio IDE. And in this case, we are interested in desktop development with C++. So we're going to click this little guy here. We're going to tick it open. And once you do this, you're going to click download and install. And this is going to install the Visual Studio compiler with the underlying compiler. You see that this is going to give us access to the MSVC compiler and all kinds of crazy things we really need to write C++ applications on Windows using the compiler from Microsoft. Now, I have to say this is going to take some time to install. So if you see that this takes up 20 minutes of your time, don't worry, this is really normal because this IDE and the compiler behind it are really large. They're not like the GCC or the Clang LLVM compilers that we just installed. Okay, so once you have this ticked or checked, you're going to click on download or install, whatever this button is saying here. This is going to install both the Microsoft Visual Studio IDE and the compiler from Microsoft that you can use directly to write C++ applications. So once we have this open, I am going to suppose that you have this installed already. I am going to close out of this because I don't want to do this. And you're going to have Visual Studio installed on your system. Once you have this installed, you're going to come to the start menu and say developer. And this is going to bring up two things. One is going to be the developer PowerShell for Visual Studio 2019. And the other is going to be a command prompt. It doesn't really matter what you choose. I am going to click on command prompt here. And once you do this, this is going to give you a terminal or a window through which the environment variables are already in to start using the compiler from Microsoft. And if we come here and type cl.exe, we're going to see that we're going to see the information here. If this gives you an error or something, you're going to know that you didn't really install this properly. So please go back and make sure you have this installed. If you have a problem, you can ask me. I can do the best I can to help you out. But by this moment, we have 3 compilers on Windows that we can use for C++ development. We have the MenjiW or the GCC compiler in our hands. We have the Clang LLVM compiler, and we have the compiler from Microsoft. And now we can install an IDE or an editor, and that's going to be Visual Studio Code. And we can connect that to this compiler so that we can start writing our own C++20 applications. We are going to head over in the next lecture and install the Visual Studio Code editor. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there. In this lecture, I am going to show you how to install the Visual Studio Code editor on Windows. So if you are watching this course on Windows, this video here is going to be a must watch. We are going to head over to our search engine and type Visual Studio Code. This is going to give you a link where we can download this cool editor. If you want, you can learn all you can about it. It is a source code editor made by Microsoft. It supports multiple languages, but we're going to be using that specifically for C++ in the course here. Here I am at the page for the editor, and you can read all you want about it, but we are interested in downloading this for Windows. If you want, you can click on this download button here, but I am just going to scroll down and have download links for Windows. If I want, I can click on user installer, system installer. You can click on what you want. If you are on a 32-bit system, you're going to download a 32-bit version. I am just going to click on 64-bit here because I am on a 64-bit operating system. Again, in this video, we are doing this for Windows, so this is going to be our area of interest here. I am going to click on this download link, and I am going to wait for things to kick off. And I will have a window to start downloading Visual Studio Code setup here. I can save this file and it is going to start downloading. Once it is downloaded, I am going to double click and really click my way through this until I have Visual Studio Code installed on my computer here. Okay, the download is good. I can crack this open. Let's click on this. And you're going to see that it is saying that it has detected that Visual Studio Code is already running on my system because I have it installed. But if you don't have it installed, you're going to click your way through and install this on Windows. And after you have it, you can start it. Okay, once you start Visual Studio Code, you're going to have a window like this. If you run it for the first time, you are probably going to see a Windows with documentation and whatever. Let's look at the welcome screen. You're going to probably see something like this, but I am not sure. But the most important thing is that you're going to have a window like this with Visual Studio Code. The first thing we want to do for C++ development is going to scroll down and click on this little thing that says extensions. I am going to click on this, and I am going to go in my search box here and type C and C++. I can even type C++, it doesn't really matter. And this is an area where we can install extensions to make Visual Studio Code do all kinds of crazy things. In this case, we are interested in making it support C and C++. So we are going to click on this extension that says Microsoft here, C and C++. I am going to click on this. And if you don't have it installed, you can click on the install button, and it is going to install this little thing and make your computer ready to use Visual Studio Code for C++. So make sure you install this, and at the end it is going to say disable or uninstall because it will be already installed and enabled on your computer. And this is really the end of our installation video for Visual Studio Code. We are going to head over in the next video and show you how you can make Visual Studio Code use the compilers that we installed in the previous video. So go ahead and finish up here and meet me in the next lecture. In this video, we're going to see how to connect our Visual Studio Code editor to a compiler so that we can compile our projects easily through the Visual Studio Code editor. We already have the IDE installed from the last two previous lectures, and we have a compiler installed. In the last lecture, we installed the GCC compiler through the MainGW project. We installed the Clang LLVM compiler. We even installed the compiler from Microsoft. Now we're going to connect the IDE to the compiler to make it really easy to compile C++ applications using these tools here. What I am going to do is really set up a template project we're going to be reusing throughout this course here. So I am going to go on a folder in my system, and I am going to right click on the folder and say open with Visual Studio Code. Let's do this. This is going to open this folder in Visual Studio Code, and I am going to trust this folder here. Be careful what you trust because some things are going to do some malicious things on your computer. Make sure you trust the folders that you open up. So I am going to trust myself because I am the creator of this folder here. And this is going to open Visual Studio Code. Now, in our install video, we installed the C++ extension for Visual Studio Code. Again, if you don't have this installed, please make sure you go back and install and make sure this is saying that this is enabled. And now we want to use this to write C++ applications. Here we're going to write a simple toy C++ application to just test that our compilers support C++20, and then we're going to use this as a starting point or as a template project. So I want you to click on this little plus icon here, and we're going to create a file called main.cpp. And once you do that, you will be able to type C++ code in this here. So we are just starting out here. I would recommend to type this exactly as I do here. So we're going to say include and say opening angle bracket and say IOStream. And we're going to go down here and say int main. And we're going to go inside these curly braces and say auto result. And you are going to exactly type what I type here. Don't worry, we're going to have a chance to learn about all these things here. So I am going to put a pair of parentheses and I am going to say 10. And I am going to put a weird operator here. This is called the spaceship operator. It is just something we can use to test that our compiler supports C++20. And we're going to put a 20 here, and then we're going to try and see if this is greater than 0. And we're going to print this out. We're going to say stdc out. Again, don't worry if you don't know what this is. This is just a way for us to test and see if our compiler is going to be able to use C++20. We're going to say result here, and this is going to be our program. Now, we want to make sure we compile this program. So to bring in your compilers in Visual Studio Code, all you have to do is come to the terminal menu here. So please come here, and we're going to have an option to configure tasks. I want you to click on this. And once you do this, you're going to see that Visual Studio Code is going to find the compilers that we just installed. You see that it has found the GCC compiler we installed in MinGW. You see that it has found the Clang compiler. I know about the G++ compiler because you can see the path here. You can see C MinGW ben g++.exe. This is where we installed our G++ compiler. And I know about the Clang compiler because that's what's being found here. For example, on this entry here, you see it says C MinGW bin Clang++. So we want to configure these two compilers here and let Visual Studio Code use them to build our C++20 projects. Now, what we're going to do is click on the G++ compiler first. And when we do that, this is going to create a tasks.json file in our project. And you see that it has created a folder called .vscode. If I click on my main CPP file here and do reveal in Explorer, this is going to open up on my system, and you see that this has created a .vscode folder. And if we go and we're going to find this tasks.json file, this is going to be our configuration to configure which compilers that Visual Studio Code is using to compile our main.cpp file here. So if we go in, it's going to really have everything ready for us. So you're going to see that it's going to be using our G++ compiler. This is the path to it. And in our args options here, we have the options that we pass to the compiler to compile our program here. Now, I want to change this to say which kind of compiler we are using. So we're going to change the label here to say build with G++ and say the version. I think that's going to be more descriptive here. So we're going to say build with G++ or GCC, and we're going to say 11.2.0 because that's our version here. And the rest is really going to be enough. So let's try and see if we can compile our program here and see the thing here printing out. But the other thing we need to do, because this program is using C++20, we need to configure our compiler to use C++20. And one way to do that in GCC, and you can really search these things. For example, if we come to our search engine here and say configure GCC to use C++20, or even GCC and say C++20, you can search these things and find information, and it is a really good way to test your things here. So let's see if we can find a link to help out. We have a Stack Overflow link here, so we can crack this open. And if we go and we're going to find a bunch of things, for example, we can say std C++20 here as an option to our compiler. And this is going to bring C++20 support in our GCC compiler. So I am going to copy this, and I am going to come back in my Visual Studio Code editor, and I am going to pass a flag to build in C++20 mode, and it is something I just got from Stack Overflow here, and we are going to pass this to our compiler and put a comma to make this a valid configuration file, and I am going to close this. Now, once we have this open and we want to build this, we need to bring a terminal window. So we're going to bring a terminal window so that we can see things happening. And we do that by coming to terminal and saying new terminal. And we will come back to terminal again and say that we want to run a task. In this case, we're going to be running our build with GCC 11.2.0. Again, if you are using a newer version, that's what you should use. And if we click on this thing, please make sure you have the main CPP file selected before you do this. So I have this selected, and I'm going to go to run task, and I am going to click on this little thing. You're going to see that this is going to kick off the process to build our program. And we're going to wait for this to finish, and you're going to see that it is using C++20 here. We're going to see that the build finished successfully, and we have a main.exe file created here. So if we go in our terminal in Visual Studio Code and click enter and type clear and hit enter, this is going to clear the screen. This is something you can do to clear things out. We can run this main.exe binary directly here. So we're going to run exe here, and if you run it, it's going to say 0. And this is an indication that we have our Visual Studio Code editor connected up to our GCC compiler, and we can use that to compile C++ applications. And this is really the configuration we need. Now, you may ask, how do I know this? Did I know the steps to follow to get this to work? Well, if you come to extension tab here, and before we even do that, I want to bring to your attention that we have a bunch of tabs here in Visual Studio Code. We have a tab that says file, I think. The one here saying Explorer. We have a one we can use for version control. If you use something like Git or whatever, you can use this. But in this course, we're mostly going to be using the Explorer tab here and the extensions tab to install things. And at a later time, I will show you how to use the debug tab here or run and debug tab. But in most cases, we're going to be using the Explorer tab or the extensions tab here. If you want, you can click on this to close this so that you have some more space. You can click again to bring this back. These are some things you can do in Visual Studio Code. But I am going to show you how to configure your compilers, where I got the information. So click on extensions here, and we're going to find our C and C++ extension. If we scroll down, we're going to find tutorials on how to set up this on different compilers. For example, you can crack this open to see how to set up Visual Studio Code to use your compiler from Microsoft. If we come back, we can see a link to see how to use this with MinGW on Windows. Let's click on this. And let's see what else we have. We can come back to here, and we can see how to use this with GCC on Linux or Clang on a Mac. You can really choose whatever is relevant for your operating system. But in this case here, we are just using the Windows operating system. So we're going to see how to use this with the MinGW compiler that we just installed. Now, we can use the MinGW compiler, and I would recommend reading up on this entire thing to have an idea on what is happening. We already have our G++ compiler, so this command is going to work again. If we come back to terminal here and run G++ version, I think we can see that we run these commands here to see these things working. So we have this step here, and if you wonder what GDB is, it is just a debugger you can use to debug your programs. And again, if we come to our terminal here and say gdb -- version, we're going to have this available from our MinGW installation. You can see that we have this here. So this is working just fine. You can really follow this and configure your Visual Studio Code installation. But I am just showing you how to do this pretty fast. You can see that this is what we set up in our configuration file, which is our tasks.json file. Now, one thing you can do is modify the tasks.json file to build every single file in your project. And this is something that is going to make things easier. What I am going to do is go back to our Visual Studio Code instance and find our project. we're going to crack open our tasks.json file, which is living in our .vs code folder. And I am going to take out the craziness I have in my arguments here. I am going to select everything. I am going to delete that. And I am going to put in a configuration that I am using for my projects here to make this super easy. What this is doing, it is telling the compiler to build in C++20 mode. It is going to tell Visual Studio, it is going to tell the compiler to build every single CPP file in our project. So if we have multiple files, they are going to be built together. And we're going to specify the name for our output file. For example, if we don't want our binary executable to be named main.exe, we can give it a name. And I am going to be naming mine rooster.exe in the course here. I would recommend doing the same so that we can really have the same habits as we go through the course here. But of course, you are free to use whatever you want in your C++ programs here. So once you have this, you can click Save here. And this is going to save our JSON file here. I can close this. And I am going to bring my terminal by going to View and a Terminal here. This is going to bring back my terminal that I had before. And I am going to run the clear command and hit enter. And I am going to do dir to show the contents of my folder on Windows here. I want to remove the main.exe file from the terminal here. So what I am going to do is say rm. And I am going to say the name of the file I want to remove. I am going to say main.exe. And if I hit enter, notice what is going to happen. The file is going to go away. I don't see it anymore here. I want to build again using my new configurations in my tasks.json file. I am going to run the task to build with our GCC compiler. This is going to build again, and you see that it is using the configurations that I passed. You see that it is building every single CPP file in the directory here. And it is going to generate a program called rooster.exe. And if we look here, we're going to find it. We can hit enter in the terminal and we can type clear to clear things out. And if we do dir again, we're going to see that we have rooster.exe and we can run it by doing rooster.exe here. And this is going to do what we want. This is really all you need to do to connect Visual Studio Code to your GCC compiler. Now, we're going to connect Visual Studio Code to our Clang compiler that we have installed. We really want to be able to use it with our project here, and we're going to go through the same steps again. So we're going to go to Terminal and say Configure Tasks. And we're going to choose something that says the Clang compiler. And we're going to find Clang++, so let's hunt for that. I have something that says that here. We have clang++.exe. I am going to click on that. And if I do this, this is going to add an entry in my tasks.json file. So watch out for this. I am going to click on this. And let's crack this tasks.json file open. And you're going to see that this is going to also set up another configuration to build using my Clang++ compiler. And again, I can edit this out a little bit to say what we want. Let's look at the version of Clang we have installed to say that out. This is going to be 12.0.1. So we're going to say build with Clang++ 12.0.1. Let's say that here in our label, 12.0.1. We can say that right here. And you see that it is really doing the same thing we did with our GCC compiler. So what I can really do is steal everything I did in my GCC compiler. I can copy this, and I am going to take out the arguments I have in my args here and use what I have in my GCC compiler. You can see that you can use the Clang compiler and the GCC compiler in the same way, and this is something really cool. So now we have the option to use two compilers, and this is really cool. So we're going to close the JSON file, and it's going to be saved automatically. And we're going to bring up our terminal window again. And let's bring this up a little bit, and we're going to do dir on Windows, and we're going to remove the binary again. We're going to remove rooster.exe, and again, what you can do, you can start typing the name of the file you want to remove and hit tab. If you do that, the terminal is going to autocomplete this for you, and this is really cool. So if I do this, the file is going to go away. You see that it is gone right here, and I can clear. And what I am going to do is build with the Clang compiler. I can do that by coming to terminal. I am going to say that I want to run a task, and I am going to be given an option. I can either build with GCC, so if I choose GCC here, it's going to be used, but I can also use Clang. Let's use Clang here, so I am going to click on this, and you're going to see that Visual Studio Code is going to kick off the build process. This is going to build my binary executable, and notice that it is using C++20 again. The build is going to finish successfully, and I will have a binary here, and this is going to be all I need to do. So if I hit enter and run my binary by tapping the name and hitting tab, this is going to autocomplete. If I run it, it's going to say 0, and this is what we expect here. If you have some kind of error, please try and fix it. If you have a problem, you can ask me, and I will do the best I can to help you out. Okay, now we have our two compilers working. We need to configure the compiler from Microsoft. Now, the compiler from Microsoft is a little bit weird. Again, you can read up on this by coming to your extension documentation and going to using the compiler from Microsoft with Visual Studio Code on Windows. You can read up on all this if you want, but I am just going to show you a quick way to get this running. So the compiler from Microsoft is special in that you have to specify the path to it. For example, if we open a regular terminal window and say cl.exe to call the compiler, we're going to see that the terminal is going to say that the cl.exe compiler is not recognized. And the reason is we don't have the proper environment variable settings for the operating system to find this compiler when we call it right here. We are able to use G++ and Clang because we put the environment variables in place. If you remember, when we installed them, we did something like this. We came to the start menu and did env. We came to environment variables here, and we put the path to our compilers in our environment variables here. You can see them right here. So we don't have the same thing for the compiler from Microsoft, and that's for a reason. Because we may have multiple compilers installed from Microsoft, then if you have multiple compilers, it would be really cumbersome to choose which compiler you want. The guys at Microsoft opted for the option for you, the developer, to specify which compiler you want to run by coming to the start menu here and typing developer and choose which PowerShell for the compiler you want to use. For example, if we want to use the Visual Studio 2019 compiler, we can click on this, and then we will have a terminal that can run the C++ compiler from Microsoft. For example, if we wait for this to be ready and say cl.exe, we're going to see that we're going to have a message saying that this is our compiler. We can use it however we want. So what we're going to do is set up a terminal like this and use this terminal to start Visual Studio Code. And Visual Studio Code is going to start in a mode where it can find the compiler from Microsoft. I know this is confusing, but please bear with me. This is what we need to do to get this to work. If we start Visual Studio Code in a mode where it knows about the environment variables for the compiler from Microsoft, we will have the ability to say cl.exe, and we will be able to use that right here. But you see that it is not recognized now, but we can use the G++ compiler. If we do this version, we're going to see that it's available. We can use it. We can use Clang++. And if we do version as well, we're going to see that we can use this little guy here. We also want the ability to use the compiler from Microsoft. But to have access to that, we will have to close the Visual Studio Code instance we have here. And we're going to come back to our project. Let's see if I can find it here. So we're going to go to the location where we have our project, and we're going to change to the location of the project here. So I can grab the location from my Visual Studio Code project that I just set up. I am going to come back to my PowerShell window that knows about the path to the C++ compiler from Microsoft. And I am going to change it to the location of my project here. So I am going to say cd and paste in the path I just copied. And if I hit enter, this is going to change to my location. And I really recommend using PowerShell if you have access to this, because it is a little more convenient to use. It supports more commands than you can use in the command prompt. But again, that's going to be your choice. Now I am in the location for my project. If I do ls or dir, you can see that I can see my main CPP file. I can see the binary we generated earlier, but this is not a problem. So what I can do here is say code and and say a dot. And this is going to start Visual Studio Code in the current folder of our project here. So if you hit enter, we're going to wait for Visual Studio Code to come up. It is going to come up with the project we had in that folder. And the special thing about starting Visual Studio Code this way is that it's going to know about the compiler from Microsoft. If we come back to our terminal here and clear and say cl.exe, you're going to see that now it knows about the compiler from Microsoft and we can use it to do things. So let's set this up again. If you want, you can read up on how to do this on the documentation from Visual Studio Code itself. But again, I am going to show you how to do this. You can see that it is really the same things they are doing here. So let's come back to Visual Studio Code and we're going to go to terminal and we want to configure a task. Now you see that we have the compiler from Microsoft available. You can see that we can use that right here. So what I am going to do is click on cl.exe build active file. And this is going to add a new entry in our configuration file. And it is going to open up. If we go here, we're going to find that we have a command to build using the compiler from Microsoft. So let's change the label here and say build with MSVC. I think this is going to be more descriptive. And this is really going to build your thing. Now, I am going to change this up so that it builds everything in the current folder. And again, I am going to remove everything here and put in a configuration that I have ready on my system here. This is what I use for all my projects. Again, this is just calling the compiler and giving it options to do things. We just need to specify that we want to use the latest standard of the C++ standard, and it is going to specify the input files. We're going to be building everything in the current folder. This is what we are saying here. And the output file is going to be called rooster.exe. If we save this by saying Control S or Command S and close our tasks.json file, we can bring up our terminal window by going to View and saying Terminal here. And we can go down and clear. We can say clear and hit enter. And if we do rm and say rooster and hit tab, this is going to remove the binary we generated with the Clang LLVM compiler earlier. Now we want to build with the compiler from Microsoft. So let's do this. We're going to say terminal and we're going to say that we want to run a task, but this time we want to build with MSVC. This is what we want to do here. If we click on this little thing, we're going to kick off the process to build with the compiler from Microsoft. And we're going to wait for the compiler to do its thing. And if we wait, we're going to see that the build finished successfully. And if we look in our folder, we're going to see that we have our output file. And we can come in our terminal and hit enter and do clear to clear things up. And if we say rooster, just like this, and hit enter, you're going to see that it's going to say 0. And this is confirmation that we are able to use our Visual Studio Code editor and be able to use it with all kinds of crazy compilers. And this is really cool. If you are on Windows, I recommend setting this up because it's going to make it easier to run C++ applications from Visual Studio Code using state-of-the-art compilers like MSVC, Clang, and GCC here. And this is really cool. Now, we have everything we need to start running C++ applications, but before I let you go, let's show you how you can set this up so that you have an easier time with regards to IntelliSense and whatever. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to our View menu and we're going to choose Command Palette. And in this, we're going to say C or C++. We can say something like this. And we're going to choose Edit Configuration UI. This is going to give us an option to configure things. And I want you to configure things on your system. So I am on a Windows system. Let's see the options we have here. I am only going to have the option for Win32. But if we go down, we can specify the things we need Visual Studio Code configured for. For example, it's going to give us IntelliSense or autocomplete and all kinds of crazy things. Using the setting we choose here, if we want, we can choose the GCC compiler or whatever. I am just going to leave in the Windows MSVC compiler because I am on Windows here. But note that you can configure these things. Now, if we go down, we're going to see that we have the option to configure the C++ standard. And the compiler path that is going to be used to figure things out, we're going to be using the compiler from Microsoft here. But note that you have the option to choose any other compiler. For example, we can choose the G++ compiler, we can choose the Clang++ compiler. You can configure these things. And if you need to change this, please come back here and do these configurations here. We're going to leave in this for IntelliSense, and what we will do is configure Visual Studio Code to use the C++ 20 standard. So we're going to do that right here. And if you set this up, you're going to see that Visual Studio Code is going to generate a CPP properties file, which is going to store all these configurations here. So it is really going to be a configuration for what we choose in our configuration here. So make sure you choose what makes sense. Again, I would recommend using C++ 20, but if you go on top, you can really use any compiler you want. I am going to use the compiler from Microsoft. This is okay. I am going to use Windows MSVC configuration for IntelliSense here. And I am going to close this. And we are really ready to start using Visual Studio Code to write C++ application. So let's clean this up a little bit. We're going to view our terminal, and we're going to remove the junk that was generated by the compiler from Microsoft. I am going to say RM and say rooster, and I can remove the binary. I can say RM and say rooster and say tab. This is going to autocomplete and really remove things I don't need. I am going to remove the PDB file. I am going to remove rooster. No, I am going to remove the main object file. So let's say main.obj, and I am going to remove main.orvc. We don't want to remove our CPP file. So now we have a project we can use as a starting point to write C and C++ applications here. So what we will be doing in the next few lectures or the next few chapters is reusing this thing here as a template project. So what I can do is call this C++ 20 template project. And let's do this here. I think I need to close Visual Studio Code, otherwise it's going to complain. So I am going to call this little guy C++ 20 template project. And later when we start learning about C++ proper, we're going to be using this as a starting point, and we won't have to reconfigure the compilers. Our project will be ready to use the compilers that we set up here, namely the compiler from Microsoft, the G++ compiler, and the Clang++ compiler, and that's going to be really cool. This is really all I had to share in this lecture. I hope you have Visual Studio Code set up to use all these compilers. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we're going to start and see how to set up your development environment on Linux. And we're going to start by installing compilers on Ubuntu 20.04. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there. In this lecture, we're going to see how to install C++ compilers on Linux. We are going to be working on an Ubuntu 20.04 system, and we will install a new version of GCC and the latest version I can get my hands on for Clang LLVM. So let's do this. Okay, so here I am on my Linux box. This is Ubuntu 20.04. If I do uname and say A, we're going to see the information on this. And you will have to adapt this for whatever Linux distribution you are on. And to install GCC, it's really simple. But the problem is, the latest version of GCC at the time of recording this video is GCC 11, and it's not available in the Ubuntu packages now. For example, if you do sudo apt-get install GCC 11, this is how you get it. If you do this, you're going to put in your password. You're going to see that this is really not available yet, right? We cannot find this. So the best version we can install is GCC 10, which I happen to have installed already on this system. So we're going to do GCC 10. That's what we're going to install here. And if we do this, we're going to see that this is already available. You can also install G++ 10. I think you can do that. Okay, so we're going to run the command here. And we're also going to see that it's already available here. But if you don't have these, they are going to be installed and you can use them on your Linux system. Another tool that is necessary on Linux is the GDB debugger. So we're going to do sudo apt-get install GDB. right? If you install it, it's going to be installed, but I already have it installed already. So now if I do GCC 10 on my system here and say version, we're going to see the version printed out. We can do G++ 10, we can see the version here. Let's do that for C++. So we're going to see the version here. We can even do GDB version. And it is going to show up. Let's wait for this. We're going to see my GDB version here. And now I can use these compilers to compile C++ code on my Linux box here. So this completes our steps to install a GCC compiler on Linux. We're going to look at how we can get a hold of the Clang compiler